The morning sun, usually a friend to the clear waters of Lakeview Marina, now shone down on a scene of pure, glorious chaos. Every single boat, from the smallest dinghy to the biggest yacht, was stuck. Not just a little stuck, but totally, completely, impossibly stuck. It was like a giant, invisible hand had pressed pause on the entire marina, freezing every vessel in place. Tugboats, those strong little heroes of the water, puffed and chugged, their engines roaring, but they couldn't budge an inch. Sailors shouted. Fishermen scratched their heads. And right in the middle of all the noisy confusion, like a bright red fire truck siren, was Barbara, the head of the Homeowners Association. Her face was as red as a ripe tomato, and her voice cut through the air like a rusty saw. "What in the world is going on here?" Barbara shrieked, pointing a shaky finger at the tangled mess of boats. Her perfectly styled blonde hair seemed to frizz with anger. "This is an outrage. An absolute disgrace. Who could have done such a preposterous thing? This marina is blocked. Completely, utterly blocked." Her words echoed across the still water, hitting the stuck boats and bouncing back. Everyone looked around, bewildered, but no one had an answer. It truly was a mystery. How had this magnificent, mind-boggling mess come to be? And what on earth was going to happen next? Was someone in big trouble? Was this a giant prank? Or something much, much bigger? Long before the Great Marina Blockade, before anyone could even imagine such a thing, there was Alex. Alex wasn't just any person, he was a person who loved the water with all his heart. He'd dreamed of living near a big, beautiful lake his whole life, the kind where the sun sparkled on the waves and the air smelled fresh and clean. He worked hard, saving every penny from his job designing little gadgets that made everyday life a bit easier. His dream wasn't just a fuzzy picture in his head, it was a clear, shining goal. He imagined quiet mornings, fishing from his own boat, and calm evenings watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors over the water. Finally, after many years of saving and dreaming, Alex found it, the perfect little house in a community called Lakeview Point. It wasn't a huge, fancy mansion, but it had a nice, cozy feel, a small garden, and best of all, it was part of a community that had its very own private marina. This meant he could keep his boat, his precious boat, close by, ready for adventure whenever he wished. His boat was named the Serenity. It wasn't a super-fast speed boat or a giant yacht. The Serenity was a sturdy, comfortable fishing boat, a bit older, with a trusty engine and just enough room for Alex and a friend or two. It had seen many calm waters and caught many fish in its time. To Alex, it was more than just a boat, it was a floating piece of his soul, a place where he could find peace and quiet away from the busy world. Life in Lakeview Point started out like a gentle paddle across a smooth lake. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving as he drove by, and the lake was just as beautiful as he'd imagined. Alex spent his first few weeks getting to know the area, exploring the little coves in the Serenity, and just enjoying the quiet joy of living by the water. He was a kind man, Alex was. He believed in treating others how he wanted to be treated, with respect and a friendly smile. If a neighbor needed help carrying groceries, Alex was there. If a child lost their ball in his yard, he'd find it and toss it back with a grin. He thought everyone would be like that, too. But Lakeview Point, like many communities, had its own set of rules, overseen by the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. At first, Alex didn't think much of the HOA. He figured rules were there to keep things neat and tidy, like keeping the grass cut and not playing loud music late at night. Simple, reasonable things. He'd read through the thick binder of rules when he moved in, but honestly, it had been a bit boring, full of legal words he didn't quite understand. He trusted that if he was a good neighbor, everything would be fine. That's when Barbara came into the picture. Barbara wasn't just a member of the HOA, she was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, or at least, she acted like it. She had an eagle eye for anything that wasn't exactly, perfectly, precisely to her liking, which usually meant anything that wasn't exactly like her house or her boat. Barbara lived in one of the fanciest houses in Lakeview Point, a sparkling white mansion with a giant, shiny yacht docked right outside. She always wore crisp, expensive clothes and had a sharp, tidy haircut. She looked like someone who had never had a single hair out of place in her entire life. Their first real interaction wasn't even about the Serenity. It was about Alex's mailbox. Alex had put up a small, cheerful little mailbox flag, shaped like a friendly bird. It was cute and made him smile every time he saw it. But one sunny afternoon, he found a neatly folded, crisp white letter in his mailbox, not from a friend, but from the HOA. It said, in very serious words, that his mailbox flag was non-compliant with architectural aesthetic guidelines, and needed to be removed within 3 days. Alex was confused. A bird flag? Non-compliant? He sighed, thinking it was a silly rule, but he removed it. He believed in following rules, even if they seemed a bit bossy. He figured it was just a one-time thing. It wasn't. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, it was about his welcome mat. It was a simple mat that said, "Welcome to the lake," with a small drawing of a fish. The letter stated it was excessively themed and did not blend seamlessly with the natural environment. Alex shook his head. He tried to laugh it off, but a tiny knot of frustration started to form in his stomach. He bought a plain brown mat. He was trying to be a good neighbor, truly, but it felt like someone was looking for reasons to find fault. He soon learned that someone was almost always Barbara. Other neighbors, like old Mr. Henderson who loved to garden, had stories too. Barbara had once made him take down his prize-winning sunflowers because they were too tall and blocked the view of the lake for people driving by, even though Mr. Henderson's house was at the very end of a cul-de-sac. Young Sarah, who had just moved in with her playful golden retriever, received a stern warning about her dog's excessive barking, even though Sarah said her dog only barked when the mailman came, just like every other dog on the street. It seemed Barbara had a knack for finding problems where no one else saw them. Alex decided to try talking to Barbara directly, hoping a friendly chat would help. He saw her one morning checking her mail, looking very important. "Good morning, Barbara," he said with his usual warm smile. "I hope you're having a lovely day." Barbara turned, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "Always a pleasure. Though I must say, your lawn could use a bit more attention around the edges. We do have standards, you know." Alex's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly brought it back. "Oh, I'll get right on that, Barbara. I was just wondering about the welcome mat. I tried to find a simple one, but it seems there's always something. Is there a specific type you'd recommend?" He was trying to be polite, to understand, to show he cared about the community rules. Barbara looked at him as if he had just asked her to explain rocket science. "Mr. Turner, the rules are quite clear. Subtle and non-distracting are the key terms. Perhaps you should review the HOA guidelines, Section C, subsection 4b, on exterior decor." She turned away before he could say another word, walking off with a sniff, leaving Alex standing there feeling a bit deflated. It was clear that a friendly chat wasn't going to solve anything. She wasn't interested in being kind or understanding. She was interested in being in charge. The lows kept coming. It was like a slow drip, drip, drip of annoying little things. A letter about leaving his trash can out for an extra hour after collection. A phone call about a branch from his tree hanging slightly over his neighbor's fence. Each time, Alex complied, grumbling a little to himself, but always choosing peace over conflict. He reminded himself that life was too short to be angry over small things. He still found joy in his boat, in the quiet mornings on the lake, in the simple beauty of nature. He held on to his belief in kindness, even when it felt like Barbara was testing it with every new complaint. Then, Barbara's focus began to shift towards the marina itself. She started attending every single HOA meeting, not just to vote, but to make long, dramatic speeches about the declining standards of the community. She talked about property values and aesthetics and how some people just didn't care enough. It quickly became clear that some people referred to anyone who didn't conform to her very specific vision of perfection. At first, her complaints about the marina were general. She'd complain about a small oil sheen from a boat he didn't even recognize, or a bit of seaweed on the dock. Then, her sharp gaze landed squarely on the Serenity. Mr. Turner's vessel, she announced at one HOA meeting, her voice booming slightly, making everyone turn to look at Alex, who sat quietly in the back. It seems to be an older model. While I appreciate the sentiment of keeping things, shall we say, traditional, we must consider the overall impression it gives to potential buyers in our community. Alex felt his cheeks warm. The Serenity was old, but she was well maintained and loved. He painted her regularly, kept her engine running smoothly, and polished her wood. She was perfectly seaworthy. Barbara, he began, standing up slowly, my boat is in excellent condition. She's been inspected many times, and she meets all safety requirements. And frankly, I believe charm and character add to our community, not detract from it. Barbara waved her hand dismissively. Character, Mr. Turner, is one thing. Deterioration is quite another. I've noticed a faint rust stain near the hull. And the paint, while freshly applied, is not the standard marine white that is universally approved. She had somehow managed to get a rule passed about boat colors, though no one else seemed to care. Over the next few months, Barbara's complaints escalated. She sent Alex a new batch of official letters, each one more serious than the last. One letter stated that the Serenity's length was marginally exceeding the recommended guidelines for its designated slip size. Another accused him of excessive overnight occupancy, even though he only stayed out on the lake a few times a month during fishing season. It was all nitpicking, designed to make his life difficult. Alex tried to fight back politely, bringing out his original purchase documents, showing proof of maintenance, even getting measurements done by a professional. But Barbara always had an answer, always another rule, always another threat of a fine. He started feeling a deep weariness. The joy he once found in his little house and his beloved boat was slowly being chipped away by this constant, petty harassment. He thought about selling the Serenity, but the idea made his heart ache. It wasn't just a boat, it was freedom, peace, a symbol of his hard work and dreams. Why should he give it up because of one person's endless need to control? He started talking to other neighbors again, asking if they felt the same way, if they could stand up to Barbara with him. Many nodded in agreement, whispering their own stories of Barbara's bullying, but when it came to doing something, they all looked at their shoes. They were afraid of fines, afraid of Barbara's sharp tongue, afraid of becoming her next target. Alex realized he was on his own. The final, crushing blow came during a special HOA board meeting called specifically to discuss marina regulations and compliance. Alex knew it was about him. He walked in, his shoulders a little slumped, but his resolve firm. He would try one last time to appeal to their better judgment, to their sense of community. Barbara, sitting at the head of the long table, looked directly at him with a triumphant glint in her eyes. Mr. Turner, she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, the board has reviewed the various infractions concerning your vessel, the Serenity, and after much deliberation, we have made a final decision. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Due to its continued non-compliance with multiple established guidelines, including length, color, and general appearance as an eyesore, which negatively impacts the property values and aesthetic appeal of our prestigious marina, we regret to inform you that your boat must be removed. Alex's stomach dropped. Removed? What do you mean, removed? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Exactly as I said, Mr. Turner," Barbara continued, a thin smile on her lips. "It must be permanently removed from the Lakeview Point Marina. Effective immediately." She held up a document. "You have precisely 48 hours to vacate your slip. Should the vessel still be present after this deadline, the HOA will arrange for its forced removal, and you will be liable for all costs incurred, which, I must warn you, will be substantial. We are talking tens of thousands of dollars, Mr. Turner. This is our final decision. There will be no further discussion on this matter." The words hit Alex like a cold wave. 48 hours. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a fine or a stern letter. This was her trying to take away his dream, his peace, his beloved Serenity. His mind raced, filled with a sudden, overwhelming surge of anger, but also a strange, quiet determination. They wanted to bully him? They wanted to take away his boat? A thought, wild and daring, flickered in his mind, something he'd never considered before. He stood up slowly, looking directly at Barbara, a new, unreadable expression on his face. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out of the meeting, the heavy decision echoing in his ears, leaving everyone in the room wondering what on earth he would do. Alex walked out of that HOA meeting, the cold words about his boat ringing in his ears. 48 hours. Get rid of the Serenity or pay a fortune. His hands clenched into fists, but it wasn't a sudden, explosive anger. It was a deep, quiet sort of fury, mixed with sadness. He had always tried to be a good person, a kind neighbor. He believed in solving problems with calm words and understanding, not with shouting or bullying. But Barbara and the HOA board had pushed him too far. They hadn't left him any room for kindness. They had taken away his choice. He walked past the perfectly manicured lawns, past the shiny, expensive cars, and past the houses that all looked a little too much alike. Lakeview Point suddenly felt less like a peaceful haven and more like a carefully controlled prison. Every rule, every complaint, every tiny letter about his welcome mat or his mailbox flag, suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't about rules, it was about power. It was about Barbara wanting to control everything and everyone. He reached his own house, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The quiet hum of his air conditioner felt oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He looked out his window towards the marina, where the Serenity sat peacefully in her slip, rocking gently with the lake's small waves. She looked so small and innocent, yet to Barbara, she was a giant problem. Alex knew he couldn't just give up. He couldn't let them win. Selling the Serenity wasn't an option. It was a part of him. And paying those outrageous fines? That was just another way for Barbara to flex her power and take his hard-earned money. He sat down at his kitchen table, pulling out a pen and a notepad. He wasn't usually a person who thought about big, dramatic plans. He liked simple solutions. But this situation wasn't simple. It needed something bold. Something that would make Barbara and the HOA think about their actions, really think about the impact they had on people. He started by listing all the times Barbara had bothered him. The mailbox flag. The welcome mat. The lawn edges. The tree branch. Then the boat complaints, the length, the color, the eyesore comments. Each point was a jab, a little cut that had added up over time. He wasn't just angry for himself. He was angry for Mr. Henderson and his sunflowers, for Sarah and her dog, for all the other quiet neighbors who were too scared to speak up. He wanted to do something that wasn't violent or mean, but something that would get everyone's attention. Something that would show them what it felt like to have your freedom taken away. He brainstormed ideas. What if he just ignored them? No, that would lead to forced removal, and he would still lose his boat. What if he tried to rally the other neighbors again? He sighed. He had tried that. They were too scared. He needed a plan that didn't rely on anyone else's bravery, just his own. His eyes drifted back to the Serenity, in her slip, then to the narrow entrance of the marina. It was a natural choke point, where all boats had to pass to get in or out. And that's when the wild idea sparked. It wasn't a mean idea, not really. It was an idea about showing, not telling. It was about making a point, a very, very big point, about what happens when you control things too much. He started sketching. The next morning, Alex woke up early, before the sun even peeked over the horizon. He made himself a strong cup of coffee, his mind clear and focused. He knew what he had to do. It was risky, yes, but it was also a way to speak without yelling, to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. He felt a strange calm wash over him, a sense of purpose. He headed down to the marina, carrying a few things he'd gathered. He noticed a couple of early bird fishermen already out, their boats quietly leaving their slips, heading out onto the open lake. Alex waved to them, and they waved back, none of them knowing the spectacle that was about to unfold. He climbed aboard the Serenity. She smelled of lake water and old wood, a comforting scent. He checked her engine, making sure everything was perfect. He knew this wasn't about damaging anything or hurting anyone. It was about creating a giant, undeniable pause. His plan relied on a few things: the narrowness of the marina entrance, the natural flow of the water, and a bit of very precise timing. He started the Serenity's engine, its familiar rumble a low comfort in the quiet morning. He carefully maneuvered her out of her slip, heading not towards the open lake, but towards the marina entrance. He had brought with him some old, very sturdy buoys he'd used for crab traps years ago, and some strong, thick ropes. He had also found some old, hollow plastic barrels he'd cleaned out. They were light but surprisingly sturdy. His plan wasn't to sink anything or block with heavy objects. It was simpler, almost like a puzzle. He positioned the Serenity just so, right at the narrowest part of the entrance. Then, with careful movements, he began to deploy his buoys and barrels, connecting them with the strong ropes. He worked quickly and efficiently, his movements practiced from years of handling ropes and knots on the water. He wasn't creating a solid wall, instead, he was making a floating barrier, a series of obstacles that, because of the water currents and the tight space, would be impossible for other boats to navigate around without getting tangled or causing a pileup. It was like setting up a complex, watery game of chess where he knew exactly how the pieces would react. He used the Serenity as the anchor point, and her presence in the middle made it even harder for larger vessels to pass. The sun started to rise higher, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. More boats began to stir in their slips. Alex knew he didn't have much time. He finished tying the last knot, stepped back, and looked at his handiwork. It wasn't flashy. It didn't look like a solid wall of steel. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it would work. He had created a bottleneck, a puzzle that no one could solve without moving his boat, or his carefully placed floating pieces. He climbed off the Serenity and onto the main dock, his heart beating a little faster. He saw a few boats already approaching the entrance, their engines rumbling, ready to head out for their morning fishing trips or leisurely cruises. They slowed, confused, as they saw the unusual arrangement of buoys and the way the Serenity was positioned. One small fishing boat, driven by an older gentleman named Frank, cautiously approached the barrier. Frank peered over the side, his brow furrowed. "What in tarnation is going on here, Alex?" Frank called out, his voice tinged with bewilderment. "Looks like someone tied up the whole dang entrance." Alex just offered a small, tired smile. "It certainly does, Frank," he replied, giving nothing away. He simply watched, knowing that the real show was just beginning. The first boats were now completely stuck, unable to pass through the unexpected maze Alex had created. Their engines idled, their captains looking around in growing confusion and frustration. The news would spread quickly through the marina. The chaos, the kind Barbara had just yelled about, was now starting to bloom. Just then, he heard it. The loud, insistent blare of a yacht's horn. It was a giant, gleaming white yacht, one of the biggest in the marina, and it belonged to a very important, very impatient man named Mr. Peterson, who was known for always being in a hurry. He watched as Mr. Peterson's yacht edged closer to the blocked entrance, the horn blaring again, louder this time. The yacht couldn't pass. No one could. And Alex knew, with absolute certainty, that this would bring Barbara running, like a bat out of you-know-where. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile for the first time in a long time. The game had truly begun. The blare of Mr. Peterson's yacht horn ripped through the morning calm, a harsh, demanding sound that echoed across the marina. He wasn't known for his patience, and the sight of his giant boat halted by an inexplicable tangle of buoys and a modest fishing vessel sent his already short temper soaring. He stuck his head out of the yacht's cabin, his face red. "What in blazes is going on?" he bellowed, his voice carrying clearly over the water. "Who's responsible for this outrageous obstruction?" His shouts, along with the growing chorus of confused questions from other boat owners, acted like a siren for Barbara. She usually made her grand entrance around 9 a.m., but the disturbance clearly pulled her in earlier. Alex saw her marching down the main dock, her usual crisp clothes looking a little rumpled from her hurried arrival. Her eyes, usually sharp and judging, were now wide with disbelief and outrage as she took in the scene of the completely jammed marina. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she shrieked, her voice reaching its usual ear-splitting volume. "This is simply unacceptable. Who has done this? This is a direct violation of every single marina regulation." Her gaze swept across the bewildered crowd, landing squarely on Alex, who stood calmly by his boat, watching the unfolding drama. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Mr. Turner," she screeched, pointing a finger that trembled with fury. "Is this your doing? Is this your pitiful attempt at retaliation?" Alex simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He just stood there, a quiet presence in the middle of all the commotion. This silence seemed to inflame Barbara even more. "You have gone too far, sir," she declared, puffing out her chest. "This is an act of vandalism. Of pure, unadulterated sabotage. You will be facing the severest penalties. This marina must be cleared immediately." But the marina wasn't going to clear immediately. More boats were now backed up, creating a floating traffic jam. Smaller boats couldn't squeeze past, and larger yachts couldn't even think about it. People started pulling out their phones, taking pictures, and making calls. The news spread like wildfire, not just within Lakeview Point, but beyond. Everyone wanted to know what was happening at the normally pristine marina. Barbara, realizing her usual threats weren't working on the immovable barrier, turned her attention to the growing crowd. "Someone help. We need to move these obstacles. Call the marina staff. Call the authorities." The marina staff, a few kind but overwhelmed young men and women, quickly arrived. They tried to untangle the ropes, to pull on the buoys, to push the Serenity even a little. But Alex had planned perfectly. The way he had positioned his boat, combined with the way the buoys and barrels were linked, meant that trying to move one part just tightened the whole knot. It was like trying to pull one string from a perfectly tied shoelace, it only made the knot tighter. The Serenity was also surprisingly heavy in that exact position, resisting all efforts to shift her. "We can't seem to move it," Ms. Albright, one of the staff members called to Barbara, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's all tied up in a way that just makes it worse if you pull." Barbara threw her hands up in exasperation. "Then get a tow boat. Get something stronger." A tow boat was called, a sturdy vessel that usually helped stranded boats. But even the powerful towboat struggled. It could pull and push, but the carefully arranged floating barrier, anchored by the Serenity, remained stubbornly in place. The towboat operator, a seasoned old sailor named Captain Jones, eventually shook his head. "Looks like someone knew exactly what they were doing here," he grumbled to no one in particular. "Trying to pull it apart might just damage the docks or other boats. It's too tight." The extreme event of the blocked marina, however, brought out a surprising reaction from some of the other residents. While Barbara was fuming, and Mr. Peterson was yelling, a few of the quieter neighbors, the ones who had silently suffered under Barbara's rules, started to whisper. Old Mr. Henderson, who had lost his sunflowers, actually chuckled under his breath. Sarah, the dog owner, gave Alex a small, almost secret smile when Barbara wasn't looking. It wasn't full support yet, but it was a crack in the wall of fear. As the hours passed, the marina remained stubbornly blocked. No boats could leave, and none could enter. People who relied on their boats for fishing businesses, or who had important meetings on the other side of the lake, grew increasingly frustrated. But mixed with the frustration, there was a growing curiosity. How did one relatively small boat, and a few buoys, manage to completely shut down a whole marina? And why? The police eventually arrived, summoned by Barbara. Two officers, Officer Davis and Officer Chen, walked along the dock, taking in the scene. They spoke to Barbara first, listening patiently to her dramatic account of sabotage and reckless endangerment. Then, they approached Alex. "Mr. Turner," Officer Davis said calmly, "we understand there's an issue here regarding your boat and this obstruction. Do you have anything to say about this?" Alex looked at them, then back at Barbara, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. He took a deep breath. "Officers," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I have been subjected to months of unfair and unreasonable demands from the HOA, specifically from Ms. Albright. My boat, the Serenity, which is my personal property and a source of great joy, has been targeted. Yesterday, I was given an ultimatum: remove my boat from the marina within 48 hours or face enormous fines and forced removal." He paused, looking directly at Officer Davis. "I believe in rules, officers. But I also believe in fairness and common sense. When rules are used to bully and oppress, when they take away a person's rightful peace, then sometimes a person has to find a way to make their voice heard. I didn't damage anything. I didn't hurt anyone. I simply made a point about what happens when freedom of movement is restricted without good reason." Barbara gasped dramatically. "He's admitting it. He's admitting to this outrageous act." Officer Chen held up a hand to quiet her. "Ms. Albright, please." "Mr. Turner, while we understand your grievances, blocking a public access point, even a private marina, is a serious matter. We need this cleared." "I understand that, officer," Alex replied. "And I am willing to discuss a solution. But my boat is not the problem. The problem is how rules are being used to control people and their lives here." He didn't offer to move it. He offered to discuss. The officers exchanged a look. This wasn't a simple case of a reckless act. It was clearly a dispute, and a complicated one involving property rights and HOA power. They couldn't just force Alex to move his boat if it truly was part of a larger protest. They started talking quietly amongst themselves, looking from the tangled marina to Barbara, then to Alex. As the afternoon wore on, the heat grew more intense, and so did the frustration of the people whose boats were stuck. Television news crews, alerted by the many calls from residents, started to arrive. Their cameras focused on the blocked marina, on the shouting Barbara, and on the calmly observing Alex. Lakeview Point, usually a quiet, upscale community, was now the center of a very unusual, very public spectacle. Barbara, seeing the cameras, instantly straightened her clothes and adopted a more refined, if still furious, expression. She began giving interviews, painting Alex as a rogue, a villain who was single-handedly ruining the community. "This man," she declared to a reporter, gesturing wildly at Alex, "is a menace. He has selfishly brought our entire community to a standstill because of his own personal grievances. This is an act of pure defiance against order and civility." But the reporters also tried to talk to Alex, and to other residents. Slowly, quietly, some of the residents, emboldened by the cameras and the sheer absurdity of the situation, started to tell their own stories. They spoke of Barbara's unreasonable rules, the petty fines, the constant scrutiny. They didn't directly blame Alex, but they hinted that there was more to the story than Barbara was letting on. The narrative slowly began to shift from "crazy boat guy blocks Marina" to "HOA tyranny pushes resident to extreme action." As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, the marina remained completely impassable. Barbara, exhausted but still fuming, barked orders into her phone, likely to her HOA lawyer. The police officers were still there, trying to mediate, but neither side was budging. Alex stood firm, a quiet sentinel guarding his Serenity and the complex web of ropes and buoys. Just as the last slivers of sunlight faded from the sky, casting long shadows over the stuck boats, a chilling message appeared on the large digital display board at the marina entrance, the one usually used for weather warnings or event notices. Someone, perhaps a quick-witted marina employee, or maybe even a resident with a dark sense of humor, had changed the message. In bright, glowing letters, it now simply read, "Marina closed indefinitely. Due to unforeseen circumstances. Contact HOA for details." The lights from the news cameras flickered, illuminating Barbara's face. It was no longer red with anger, but ghostly pale with shock. "Indefinitely," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her plan to remove Alex's boat had backfired in the most spectacular way possible, shutting down the entire marina, and now the whole world was watching. This extreme event, the official declaration of the marina's indefinite closure, was a disaster of her own making, and the true gravity of the situation was finally sinking in for her. What would the residents, and the board, do now that their precious marina was completely useless? The digital sign at the marina entrance glowed, its stark message, "Marina closed indefinitely," casting a sickly green light on Barbara's ashen face. Her usual commanding posture crumbled slightly, her shoulders slumping just a bit. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was a crisis for her, a public humiliation. The news cameras, still rolling, zoomed in on her stunned expression. Mr. Peterson, the impatient yacht owner, had stopped yelling and was now pacing his deck, his face a thundercloud of irritation directed squarely at Barbara. Even the police officers looked at her with a new level of concern. This was far beyond a simple HOA dispute now. This was a full-blown public spectacle, impacting everyone. Alex, however, remained calm. He had made his point. He hadn't sought to cause a huge amount of trouble, but he had hoped to make people truly understand the impact of Barbara's endless rules. The indefinite closure meant that no boats could move, no fishing trips, no leisurely cruises, no business deliveries. It was a complete stop to the very thing that made Lakeview Point so attractive to its residents. The immediate aftermath of the indefinite closure was pure chaos, a less extreme event compared to the initial blockage but still deeply unsettling. Calls flooded the HOA office. The phone lines were ringing off the hook, vibrating with anger and frustration from residents who just wanted to get their boats out. People who had paid large sums for their slips were furious that they couldn't use them. Business owners, like the tour boat operator, a friendly man named Roger who ran daily trips around the lake, were losing money by the minute. His boat, the Lake Dreamer, was just one of the many vessels trapped inside the marina. Barbara, recovering from her initial shock, swung into action, but it wasn't the kind of action that helped. She started barking orders, first at the marina staff, then at the police, then into her phone with her HOA lawyer. "This is an act of terrorism," she declared to anyone who would listen. He must be arrested. This blockade is destroying our community. Officer Davis, however, had a different approach. He approached Alex, his voice still calm, but firm. "Mr. Turner, this has gone on long enough. People are genuinely upset. We need to find a way to resolve this peacefully." Alex nodded. "Officer, I agree. I don't want to cause ongoing distress. But the core issue remains. My boat was unjustly targeted. I was given an impossible ultimatum. If this blockade is removed, what guarantee do I have that Ms. Albright won't simply go back to her bullying ways?" Officer Chen chimed in, "Mr. Turner, we can't make promises about HOA disputes. Our job is to ensure public order and safety. This blockade affects both." Just then, a small crowd of residents started to gather near Alex. They weren't angry at him, not entirely. Some were still frustrated, but others looked at him with a glimmer of understanding. "Mr. Henderson shuffled forward, his eyes twinkling. "You know, Alex," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "it's a shame when good folks can't enjoy their boats. And it's a bigger shame when folks get pushed around for no good reason." Sarah, the dog owner, added, "It's not fair, what they did to your boat, Alex. Everyone knows Barbara can be a lot." A few other residents nodded, murmuring in agreement. This was the kindness and empathy Alex had hoped for. Not immediate action, but a growing recognition of the unfairness he faced. The news reporters, always looking for a good story, picked up on this shift. They started interviewing these other residents, who, now that the spotlight was on the HOA, felt a little braver. Their stories, small as they were, painted a clear picture of Barbara's controlling nature. The once unquestioned authority of the HOA, and specifically Barbara, was beginning to crack under the pressure of public opinion. This growing sympathy for Alex was a low point for Barbara. Her face tightened as she watched people actually talking to Alex, defending him. She stomped over, her heels clicking angrily on the dock. "Don't listen to his sob story," she commanded the crowd. "He is the one causing all this trouble. He is trying to manipulate you." But her words seemed to have less power now. People were starting to see her for what she was, a bully. The extreme event of the Marina closure had forced everyone to confront the underlying issues, and Barbara's control was visibly slipping. The HOA board, pressured by calls from angry residents and the negative news coverage, finally called an emergency meeting late that afternoon. Alex was formally invited, as were the police officers. Barbara tried to object, insisting Alex was a criminal, but the other board members, looking pale and worried, overruled her. They knew they had a big problem on their hands, and it wasn't just Alex's boat anymore. It was the entire Marina, their community's reputation, and potentially, very expensive lawsuits. The meeting room felt cold and tense. Barbara sat rigidly, flanked by other board members who looked uncomfortable. Alex sat across from them, looking tired but determined. Officer Davis and Officer Chen sat observing. Barbara started the meeting, her voice tight with forced authority. "Mr. Turner, this outrageous blockade must end. Your actions have caused immense disruption and financial loss. We demand that you remove your boat immediately." Alex spoke calmly, his voice steady. "And what happens then, Barbara? Do I just go back to being targeted? Will you find another non-compliant issue with my boat next week? Or my flower pots? Or my socks drying on the line?" He looked at the other board members. "This isn't just about my boat. It's about how you treat people. It's about using power to make others miserable. It's about fairness." One of the board members, a quiet man named David, cleared his throat. He had always seemed to be afraid of Barbara, but now, with the whole community watching, he found a tiny bit of courage. "Barbara, perhaps we should listen to Mr. Turner. The public perception, it's very damaging. We have to consider a resolution that is fair to everyone, not just about upholding rigid rules. Barbara's head snapped towards David. Fair? He has sabotaged our Marina. There is no fairness for lawbreakers. Officer Davis intervened. Ms. Albright, with all due respect, Mr. Turner has expressed a willingness to discuss a resolution. We are here to facilitate that, not to enforce a unilateral demand. If you want this marina open, you need to be willing to negotiate. The word negotiate seemed to stick in Barbara's throat. She was used to commanding, not negotiating. But the glare from Mr. Peterson, who had somehow managed to sneak into the back of the meeting room, seemed to push her. He clearly wanted his yacht free. Very well, Barbara finally said, her voice dripping with annoyance. What are your demands, Mr. Turner? She made it sound like he was a hostage-taker. Alex took a moment, gathering his thoughts. My only demand is fairness, he stated. First, I want a written guarantee that the Serenity is fully compliant with all marina rules, as long as it's kept in good condition, and that no further attempts will be made to remove it based on arbitrary or petty reasons. Barbara scoffed, but David quickly nodded. That seems reasonable, Alex, if your boat passes a standard safety and condition inspection, David said. Second, Alex continued, I want a review of all HOA rules, with resident input. Many rules are simply too strict and make life here difficult for everyone, not just me. We need more empathy, less control. He glanced at Mr. Henderson and Sarah, who were now standing outside the meeting room, peering in. Barbara's face grew even paler. Reviewing her rules? This was an attack on her very authority. She opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Peterson, from the back of the room, loudly cleared his throat, making her jump. And third, Alex said, looking directly at Barbara, I want a formal apology, not just to me, but to all the residents who have been unfairly targeted and bullied by the HOA's overzealous enforcement. The room fell silent. An apology? From Barbara? That was an extreme request, one that touched the core of her pride and power. Barbara's face contorted, a mixture of rage and disbelief. Her jaw was clenched so tight, it looked like it might break. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, knowing how hard that would be for her. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. What would Barbara do now, faced with such a public and personal challenge to her authority? Would she break, or would she find a way to refuse, condemning the marina to remain closed indefinitely? The demand for a formal apology hung heavy in the air, a challenge that went beyond rules and regulations. It struck right at the heart of Barbara's pride. Her face, already pale from the stress of the day, now flushed a mottled red. She looked as if she might explode, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Apologize? To Alex? And to everyone? This was an extreme request, one she clearly found impossible to swallow. An apology, she finally sputtered, her voice high and strained. Mr. Turner, you are being utterly preposterous. I have done nothing to apologize for. I uphold the rules. You are the one who has brought this community to a standstill. She slammed her hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. I refuse. Absolutely refuse to apologize for doing my duty. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. David, the quiet board member, cleared his throat again. Barbara, he began cautiously, the marina is still closed. We have news crews here. Residents are furious. We need a way forward. Mr. Turner's requests, while significant, offer a path to resolution. A path to humiliation. Barbara hissed back, her eyes flashing. I will not be bullied into apologizing by this hooligan. She glared at Alex, who met her gaze calmly. He knew this was the hardest part for her. It wasn't about the boat anymore, it was about her ego. Officer Davis, sensing the deadlock, spoke up. Ms. Albright, with all due respect, the longer this blockade remains, the more severe the consequences become for the entire community. We are talking about potential lawsuits, significant financial losses for businesses, and a very public black eye for Lakeview Point. A concession now could save a great deal of trouble later. Barbara paced in front of the table, her mind racing. She could see the worried faces of the other board members, the stern looks from the police. She could almost hear Mr. Peterson's impatient grumbling from outside the door. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. She hated admitting she was wrong, even more than she hated the thought of her precious Marina being closed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stopped pacing. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, devoid of its usual booming confidence. "Very well," she rasped, her eyes avoiding Alex's. I will offer a statement. A formal statement. Not an apology, per se, but an acknowledgement. Alex shook his head gently. "Barbara, it needs to be an apology. To me, and to the community. For the unfairness, for the bullying. For the way you used the rules to hurt people." He wasn't being mean, he was being firm. He needed her to truly understand the impact of her actions, not just give a watered-down excuse. Another long silence stretched out. Barbara's face was a mask of internal struggle. Her desire to maintain control clashed with the undeniable reality of the situation. Her reputation, her position, everything was on the line. The thought of the Marina staying closed, indefinitely, the residents growing angrier by the hour, seemed to finally break through her stubborn pride. "Fine," she snapped, the word bursting from her lips like a deflating balloon. I will apologize. But it will be a public statement, and then this ridiculous blockade must be removed immediately." This was a major victory, a less extreme event compared to the blockade, but a massive shift in power. Alex nodded slowly. "And the review of the HOA rules, with resident input?" David quickly jumped in. "Yes, Alex, we can absolutely commit to that. We will schedule a community forum within the next 2 weeks to begin the process, and will form a committee with diverse resident representation to review and propose changes." He looked relieved, eager to move forward. The board members quickly hammered out the details. Alex's boat would be officially deemed compliant, pending a quick inspection. The HOA would issue a public apology, read by Barbara herself, acknowledging the overzealous enforcement of regulations, and expressing regret for the distress caused to residents. And a full review of the HOA rules would begin immediately, with significant resident involvement. It was a compromise, but one that shifted power back towards the community and away from the rigid control of a few. The next morning, the Marina was still blocked, but the atmosphere had changed. The news cameras were still there, but the story was now less about chaos and more about a potential resolution. A small stage had been set up near the Marina entrance, and the residents of Lakeview Point gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and hope. Barbara, looking very uncomfortable, stepped up to the microphone. She was wearing a perfectly pressed suit, but her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a piece of paper. She cleared her throat. "Good morning, residents of Lakeview Point," she began, her voice stiff. "As you know, our Marina has been closed due to unforeseen circumstances. The Homeowners Association, and specifically, myself as president, would like to address this situation." She paused, took a deep breath, and then, in a voice that was clearly forced but undeniably an apology, she continued. "We acknowledge that the enforcement of certain regulations, particularly concerning Mr. Alex Turner's vessel, the Serenity, has been overzealous. We regret the distress this has caused Mr. Turner and other residents who felt unfairly targeted by our rules." She paused again, glancing quickly at Alex, who stood quietly in the crowd. We understand that our actions may have created an environment of undue pressure. We sincerely apologize for any hardship or unhappiness our strict interpretations of the rules may have caused. We are committed to reviewing all HOA guidelines with significant resident input, ensuring fairness, transparency, and empathy are at the forefront of our community's spirit. It wasn't a soaring speech, but it was an apology, a public admission of fault from Barbara, something no one had thought possible. A murmur went through the crowd. Some residents clapped softly, a few even cheered. Alex simply watched, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. He had chosen kindness first, then stood firm when kindness wasn't enough. After the apology, Alex stepped forward. He didn't gloat or make any grand statements. He simply said, "Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to the board for listening. I believe that with genuine commitment, we can make Lakeview Point an even better place for everyone." Then, the final extreme event of this chapter began. Alex walked over to the Serenity. He took a deep breath, and with careful, practiced movements, he began to untie the knots he had so carefully made. He released the ropes, gathered the buoys and barrels, and methodically cleared the blockade. The Marina staff, now working with him, helped move the obstacles. The Serenity was then gently guided back into her slip. As the last obstacle was removed, a wave of relief washed over the Marina. Boat engines rumbled to life. The first boat, Mr. Peterson's yacht, wasted no time, speeding out of the Marina with a powerful roar, clearly eager to escape the drama. Other boats, however, moved slower, their captains waving to Alex, some even calling out thanks. The Marina was open again. But the story wasn't over. As Alex secured the Serenity in her slip, feeling the quiet hum of the lake beneath his feet, he saw Barbara watching him from the end of the dock. Her face was no longer angry, or even shocked. It held an expression he couldn't quite place, perhaps a hint of grudging respect, or maybe, just maybe, the faintest flicker of understanding. The immediate crisis was averted, the Marina was open, and an apology had been given. But the larger question remained. Could Barbara, the queen of rules, truly change? And what would the new, resident-driven HOA look like? With the Marina finally clear and Barbara's apology echoing in the crisp morning air, a fragile peace settled over Lakeview Point. Alex had kept his word, and now it was the HOA's turn. The immediate anger had faded, replaced by a cautious optimism from many residents. They had seen Barbara humble herself, if only slightly, and the promise of a rule review gave them hope for a fairer future. For Barbara, the apology was a bitter pill to swallow. She returned to her gleaming white mansion, the cheers for Alex still ringing in her ears. She felt defeated, her authority chipped away, her perfect world seemingly crumbling. She had been forced to admit she was wrong, a feeling she absolutely detested. She knew she had to go through with the rule review and the public forum, but she was already plotting ways to regain control, to twist the narrative back in her favor. She couldn't stand the idea of losing her power, of being seen as anything less than the supreme leader of Lakeview Point. Over the next few weeks, a subtle change began to ripple through the community. Neighbors who had once just given quick waves now stopped to chat. People talked openly about the HOA, sharing their own experiences, both good and bad. Mr. Henderson brought a small, potted sunflower to Alex's porch as a thank you. Sarah often waved to him as she walked her dog, her golden retriever bounding happily, no longer whispered about as excessively barking. It felt like a weight had been lifted, a quiet joy returning to the community. Alex, too, felt lighter. He spent more time on the Serenity, enjoying the lake, the peace she offered him. The HOA called for a community forum to discuss the rule review, and this was where the real test would begin. Barbara, though obligated to be there, sat stiffly at the head table, her face a mask of polite indifference. Alex attended, as did many other residents, eager to share their thoughts. The meeting was long, filled with many voices, some angry, some hopeful. People spoke about common sense, about respecting personal property, and about fostering true community spirit instead of focusing on petty rules. Alex spoke calmly, advocating for empathy and understanding. Barbara tried to steer the conversation, to dismiss concerns, but the new board members, emboldened by the recent public outcry, kept her in check. It was a less extreme event, a slow, grinding process of discussion, but it was chipping away at the old order. She bristled at every suggestion to loosen a rule, every mention of flexibility or common sense. She felt her grip slipping further, and a quiet, simmering resentment began to brew inside her. She wanted her authority back, no matter the cost. Then, about a month after the Marina incident, something truly odd started happening around Lakeview Point. It began subtly. First, some of the residents who had been outspoken at the community forum started receiving anonymous, very strange packages. They weren't threatening, but they were definitely unsettling. Mr. Henderson received a bag of sunflower seeds, but they were coated in bright pink glitter. Sarah found a dog leash on her porch, but it was tiny, meant for a doll, and tied in a dozen impossible knots. Alex found a tiny, plastic toy boat floating in his birdbath, painted a sickly shade of swamp green. These were petty, strange acts, almost like a child's revenge, but they left a lingering feeling of being watched, of unease. No one knew who was doing it. The police were informed, but with no real harm, they couldn't do much. The strange packages were just the beginning of a new, more extreme event. Things escalated. Residents' mailboxes, instead of being non-compliant, were now being filled with absurd items, dried leaves, crumpled up old newspaper clippings about trivial things, or once, a single, lonely sock. Then, some outdoor lights in people's gardens would mysteriously flicker on and off all night, draining batteries. Garden gnomes, a common sight in Lakeview Point, would sometimes be found turned backward or arranged in strange, creepy circles. It was all harmless, yes, but deeply irritating and unsettling, designed to create widespread frustration and chaos, to remind people that someone, somewhere, was still pulling strings. Alex had a hunch about who was behind it, but he had no proof. He watched Barbara at the next HOA meeting. She seemed almost smug, a little twinkle in her eye when these strange incidents were brought up. She would sigh dramatically and say, "Oh dear, it seems our community is simply falling apart since we stopped enforcing all the rules so strictly. Perhaps some people prefer chaos." She was trying to blame the rule review, trying to make people yearn for the good old days of her strict control. But the residents weren't fooled. They were annoyed, but they weren't turning against the idea of rule reform. Instead, their frustration started to shift. This wasn't chaos, this was targeted annoyance. This was someone trying to force them back in line. And many began to suspect who that someone might be. One particularly frustrating morning, Alex woke up to find the Serenity still in her slip, but someone had tied dozens of colorful, child's balloons, filled with water, all over her. They hadn't burst, but they bounced and jingled, making it impossible to move the boat without popping them and soaking himself. He sighed, recognizing the petty, childish nature of the act. He untied them one by one, shaking his head. Then, the wildest, most extreme event of all unfolded. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning, a crucial one where the new, more relaxed rule proposals were to be presented and voted on. The meeting was held in the large community hall. Every seat was filled, as residents wanted to be part of this important decision. Barbara, dressed in her most severe suit, walked in with an air of absolute confidence, as if she had a secret up her sleeve. She sat at the head of the table, a tiny, almost invisible smirk playing on her lips. As David, the board member, began to present the new rule proposals that would make the community fairer, less restrictive, more empathetic, a strange, high-pitched whirring sound started coming from the back of the room. Everyone turned. And then they saw it. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of tiny, remote-controlled drones, no bigger than a child's hand, began to fill the air. They weren't flying erratically. They were moving in formation, like a swarm of angry bees, but each one carried a single, very small, plastic toy. As they buzzed through the air, they started dropping their tiny payloads. It wasn't anything dangerous, but what they dropped was utterly, spectacularly absurd. Tiny, plastic toy mailboxes, mailbox flags shaped like miniature birds, miniature welcome mats with silly fish on them, minuscule garden gnomes, and incredibly small, bright pink glitter-covered sunflower seeds began to rain down on the heads of the residents and the HOA board. The drones zipped and darted, dropping their strange cargo with surprising accuracy, landing tiny plastic items directly on people's laps, in their hair, and on the meeting table. Laughter erupted from some of the residents, a mixture of shock and sheer amusement. This was beyond petty, it was ridiculously theatrical. But the laughter quickly turned to a different kind of noise when the drones, instead of disappearing, suddenly shifted tactics. A different kind of drone, a slightly larger one, began to emerge from the swarm, these ones carrying small, incredibly flimsy, clear plastic bags. And as they flew over Barbara, they began to drop their contents. It wasn't anything harmful. It was glitter. Thousands upon thousands of tiny, shimmering, iridescent specks of rainbow glitter. It wasn't just a sprinkle, it was a deluge. Barbara, still sitting at the head of the table, was instantly covered from head to toe. Her severe suit shimmered. Her perfectly coiffed hair sparkled. Her face, her glasses, her hands, everything was coated in a dazzling, impossible amount of glitter. She looked like a human disco ball. Barbara shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and humiliation. My God! What is this? Stop this madness. This is an act of war. She jumped up, trying to swat away the drones, but they darted just out of reach, continuing their glitter bombardment. The other residents were now laughing out loud, pointing, some even taking out their phones to record the unbelievable scene. It was a wild, chaotic, and completely unforgettable ending to the HOA saga. No one knew for sure who was controlling the drones, but a few quick glances darted towards Barbara's usually quiet, unassuming gardener, a young man who had once been on the receiving end of Barbara's overzealous complaints about his pruning shears. He stood innocently by the door, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his lips. The meeting erupted into complete pandemonium, the rule proposals forgotten amidst the glitter and drone swarm. Barbara, covered in shimmering dust, was shouting incoherently, trying to escape the glittering rain. It was the ultimate, public, and hilariously humiliating consequence of her control. The era of the HOA Karen was over, not with a bang, but with a sparkling, undeniable shower of glitter. And as the last drone zipped away, leaving Barbara shimmering like a furious fairy godmother, everyone in Lakeview Point knew that things were about to change, truly and completely, forever.